Welcome back to our General Awareness course on the transportation of dangerous goods regulations. In this module, we will discuss the labels and placards required by the TDG regulations. In the last module, we talked about preparing shipping documents, one of the most common activities in TDG. Now I want to discuss a second common activity, labels and placards. So why bother with labels and placards? Well, look at the picture and imagine you're the fire chief responding to the incident. How much danger is there? Right now, you don't have much information. But add in the placards at the back, now we're in business. Taking out some binoculars, we see it as a flammable gas, specifically UN 1075. And looking up UN 1075 in Schedule 1, we see it as liquefied petroleum gas, something like propane. Now, seeing the placard, we can properly plan how to deal with this incident. That is why we bother with labels and placards. The regulations call placards and labels safety marks. As you can see, there are a lot of them. While we deal with them in detail in our Transportation of Dangerous Goods Safety Marks course, we will talk about them more generally in this module. As I mentioned a minute ago, safety marks give a quick identification of dangerous goods in the event of an emergency situation. They can also serve as an awareness tool for people involved in transportation in a similar way to WHMIS labels. Unless an exemption applies, safety marks are required on all means of containment holding dangerous goods. Beyond placards and labels, safety marks also includes orange panels, signs, marine pollutant marks, numbers, letters, abbreviations, and words. Generally, labels are displayed on small means of containment, while placards are displayed on large means of containment. Pop quiz. What's the definition of a small means of containment? As I'm sure you remember, small means of containment is less than or equal to 450 liters. A large means of containment is simply over 450 liters. Beyond where they go, the difference between labels and placards is mostly just about their size, with the placards being 2.5 times larger than the labels. So who has responsibility for putting on the safety marks? As with classifying dangerous goods, it is the consignor who is responsible for seeing that the right labels and placards are applied. In practice, though, most placards are applied by carriers. And what must a carrier do? The carrier must ensure that the safety marks do not fall off or get obscured, such as by mud. As well, in a load carrying several classes of dangerous goods, the carrier must update the placards as different dangerous goods are loaded or unloaded. That is, if a truck starts out carrying propane cylinders, Class 2.1, and car batteries, Class 8, they would initially display 2 placards, one for each class. If the driver drops off the batteries, leaving only the propane, the driver must remove the Class 8 placard, as it would no longer be accurate. Let's talk just about labels for a bit. Remember, labels go on small means of containment. Specifically, every small means of containment must display a label for the primary class of the dangerous goods it holds, plus a label for each subsidiary class. So going back to methanol, each small means of containment would have 2 labels, one for Class 3, one for Class 6.1. That is, if you are shipping 12 of these 1-gallon bottles of methanol, each bottle must have 2 TDG labels. In addition to the generic label, you must also display the UN number next to the primary class label. This can be done in one of two ways. Next to the primary class label for the dangerous goods, as in the left-hand figure, or within a white rectangle located on the primary class label without the prefix UN, as in the right-hand figure. Now I know you're saying, I don't see any TG labels on most bottles I receive. This is because of a common sense exemption. A label is not required on a small means of containment that is inside another small means of containment, if the outer small means of containment has a label displayed on it. Put in simpler terms, as long as someone can see the label on the shipping box, you do not need to label each bottle inside the box. And the label must be placed logically. That is, you cannot place it on the bottom of the means of containment, or if the containers are stacked, on the top. In both cases, it would not be seen. Using some logic, place the label in a location where people will likely see it. And for gas cylinders, place it on the shoulder of the cylinder. In the case of very small containers, a label with 30 millimeter sides, as opposed to standard 100 millimeter, may be displayed on a tag attached to a small means of containment. In many cases, we are shipping large quantities of small means of containment. That is several dozen bottles of product X at a time. In such cases, it is common to consolidate the bottles for ease of handling through such means as shrink wrapping or using boxes. The shrink wrap pallets or boxes are called overpacks. Do you need to label an overpack? It depends. If the label for each class of dangerous goods inside the overpack is visible, no extra labels are required. Common sense strikes again. But if you cannot see the safety marks, such as through a cardboard box, then you must attach to the overpack an overpack sign plus the same labels as are required for the dangerous goods inside the overpack. Where to attach the overpack sign? On one side of the overpack, if the overpack's capacity is less than 1.8 cubic meters. That is 64 cubic feet, or to be more illustrative, a 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot box. Or on two opposite sides of the overpack, if the overpack's capacity is greater than or equal to 1.8 cubic meters. So this is what it looks like in practice for a box of paint with flammable solvents. You see the overpack sign and the labels. Let's do a quick exercise. Say you want to ship 12 4-liter bottles of methanol. The bottles are inside 3 cardboard boxes, each holding 4 bottles. And you want to add to that package 14 car batteries already filled with acid. What would the labeling requirements be? For methanol, you must label each box on one side with a Class 3 primary label with the UN number, plus a Class 6.1 subsidiary label. The inside bottles do not have to be labeled. For the batteries, you must label each one on one side with a Class 8 label. The overpack does not have to be labeled, as you would be able to see the labels for the methanol and batteries through the shrink wrap. And that's it for labels. Easy as pie. Now I want to move on to placards. The rules for placards are somewhat similar to those for labels, with a few complexities. As with labels, each large means of containment must have a placard for each of the dangerous goods it contains. But unlike labels, the only placard usually required is the one for the primary class. But you do need more placards than you do labels. While you only need to label one side of a small means of containment, you need to display a placard on each side of a large means of containment. For example, for a transport truck here, you display a label at the front of the truck, at the back of the trailer, both sides of the trailer, and on the front of the trailer. There's a special case here, though. If you are carrying two or more dangerous goods that have different UN numbers, but identified by the same placard, you only need to display the placard once per side. For instance, if you were carrying diesel fuel and gasoline, which have different UN numbers but are both Class 3, you only need to display the Class 3 placard once per side. I mentioned that you usually only display a placard for a primary class. Well, this is the exception that causes me to say usually. You must display the subsidiary class next to the placard if the primary class placard, if the dangerous goods require an emergency response assistance plan, and either of two conditions are met. First, the dangerous goods have a subsidiary class of 4.3. This means they would react with any water sprayed on them during attempts to put out a fire. Thus, emergency crews would have to put the fire out in some other way. Or two, the dangerous goods have a subsidiary class of 6.1, packing group 1, the most dangerous, due to inhalation toxicity. This means that emergency crews would have to wear special respirators. As you can see from these examples, the exemptions requiring these subsidiary placards are for fairly obscure products. Let's bring this together with an example. Suppose you are carrying gasoline, primary class 3, and hexafluoroacetate, class 2.3 and subsidiary class 8, together in a truck. What placards are required where? Well, we need a class 3 placard for flammable gas and a class 2.3 placard, toxic gas, on each side and each end. We do not need the placards for hexafluoroacetone's subsidiary class, as it does not fall within one of the exemptions I just mentioned. Now, placards, as with TDG as a whole, are for emergency crews. That's a common sense point that, if you're carrying a means of containment inside a larger means of containment, and you cannot see the inside placards, then you need to put placards on the outside. By way of explanation, here you can easily see the placards on the individual containers. Thus, the trailer does not need placards. The reverse is true here. Once the trailer doors are closed, you would not be able to see the placards on the boxes. Thus, the trailer needs placards. As well, placards do not usually need to have the UN number. There are two exceptions to this rule. 1. If you have enough of the dangerous goods that you require an emergency response assistance plan, which we will discuss in a later module. Or 2. The dangerous goods are a liquid or a gas in direct contact with the large means of containment. The classic example is a gasoline or oil tanker, truck, or rail car. In these, the product is in direct contact with the steel of the tank. Thus, the UN number is required. How do you display a UN number? Very similar to labels. You can display the number either within a white rectangle located on the primary class label or on an orange panel placed next to the primary class label. You do not need to display a UN number in both ways. As with labels, you do not add the prefix UN. Now you may have wondered what happens with a mixed load, such as a trailer of different dangerous goods going to Home Depot. Do you need rows of placards to cover everything off? The quick answer is no. There is a danger placard. This generic placard can be used when two conditions are met. 1. A large means of containment contains two or more dangerous goods that require different placards. And 2. The dangerous goods are contained in two or more small means of containment. A narrow exception occurs if a road or railway vehicle that contains a flammable gas, like propane, is to be transported by a ship like a ferry. The flammable gas placard must still then be displayed on the vehicle. But, as with a lot of exceptions, the danger placard has some limitations. You cannot use it when the dangerous goods have a gross mass over 1,000 kilograms, are included in the same class, and are offered for transport by one consignor. Or the dangerous goods require an emergency response assistance plan. Or the dangerous goods are in class 2.3 toxic gases, or are toxic by inhalation, like chlorine. Or more exotically, the dangerous goods are either class 4.3 water reactive or 5.2 organic peroxides that require a controlled or emergency temperature. But if you start off with, say, 5 different dangerous goods, and you drop off 4 of them, you would only have 1 dangerous good left. If the danger placard is used when you have more than 1 dangerous good, what happens? Common sense striking again here. In these cases, you can still use the danger placard, even though there's only 1 class of good left on the vehicle. And we even have a special placard exemption if you are at or under 500 kilograms. In these cases, you do not need a placard. Question: do you think this exemption would still apply if you have 3 different dangerous goods, but the total mass is still under 500 kilograms? Yes, the exemption is just concerned about the total mass, not how many classes there are. But again, there are limitations. The 500 kilogram placarding exemption cannot be used for dangerous goods requiring an emergency response plan, requiring the display of a subsidiary class label, that are flammable gases being transported by ship or ferry, that are toxic gases or toxic by inhalation, or once again are water reactive or organic peroxides that require control or emergency temperature. And that is it for the major placards. But I do want to mention several special signs and provisions. I will not get into details on these, beyond noting that they are required in certain specific circumstances. The list of special signs and provisions is on the slide and in the participant guide, and includes special signs for such things as hauling mixed loads of gases, gasohol, some infectious substances, and more. I will close this module with two quick exercises. Suppose you are moving a pallet of 144 4-liter cans of toluene, Class 3, and 25 car batteries, 20 kilograms each, Class 8, from the Halifax Canadian Tire Store to the Dartmouth Canadian Tire Store, 20 kilometers away. What placards do you need to display? Consider that you are moving dangerous goods from two different classes and the total mass is under 1,000 kilograms. The quick answer here is the danger placard. And our second scenario, suppose you want to ship 248 1-kilogram cans of drain cleaner, which is 90% sodium hydroxide, from Halifax to Fredericton. What placards do you need? Again, a quick answer, none. The 500 kilogram placarding exemption would apply. And that concludes our discussion of the transportation of dangerous goods, labels, and placards. I invite you now to move on to Module 6, where we will discuss means of containment.